Hi, good morning, everyone. This is it could be evening. Not real sure when you're when you're viewing this. This is Soch 101. This is actually our final conversation or lecture. I don't know how much conversation is actually happening. So this is chapter 15, Religion in Modern Society. The final exam, which is really just over the last four chapters that you're going to take, anyway, chapter 15 is going to be the final one. So I want to say this before we get started with the chapter on religion. One of the things I want to make clear, in sociology, we're not interested in if one religion is better than another religion. That's not really our interest. What our interest is, what is the impact of religion on society? Clearly, there's an impact. Here in the United States, if you take a look at our laws, U.S. law is based on English common law. English common law is based on religious law. So it doesn't take long at all to find religion having an impact. Look at headlines. I mean, outside of the coronavirus, and an awful lot of headlines, oftentimes, whether it's immigration or things happening in other parts of the world, here in the United States, oftentimes those conversations have religion as a backdrop. So it's still, even today in 2020, there's an awful lot of impact of religion on society. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. We've had a couple chapters where we needed to come up with a definition that had the breadth to handle all kinds of different groups that would fall under that. We have to do the same thing with religion. So I want you to understand this. So in religion, religious groups are trying to answer questions of what I would refer to as ultimate meaning. For instance, what happens when I die? Why am I here? What's the purpose of life, right? Those are questions of ultimate meaning. Usually when you have those, it's 2 a.m. in the morning and you can't sleep and you don't have answers to those, but you're searching for those. Religion provides answers to those kinds of questions, right? So religion provides answers to ultimate meaning. Here's where this is the part that I want you to get. So if part of the answer to the questions of ultimate meaning, if part of the answer is something greater than human, if part of the answer is something that is supernatural, many people would refer to this as God or gods, then we're talking about religion, right? So it's answers of ultimate meaning with something that is supernatural, God, right? So then we're talking about religion. Religion's given us a lot through the years. Religion has given us rules to live by. One of the things we know about our species, we actually need some boundaries. If we don't have boundaries and guidelines, it's chaos, right? And that's a little unfortunate because I would prefer fewer boundaries. But having said that, I also recognize that for us to be able to interact successfully as a species in society, we need some rules and guidelines. And so we have those, right? We've talked about conformity and those sorts of things, and religious and conformity go hand in hand, right? So remember back to our conversations on conformity, ash and the lines of differing length, right? So those sorts of things. Okay. These are, I'm just giving you the highlights. So one of the things I want to make clear, when sociology started, there's always controversy, but when sociology started, many believed that sociology would in many ways replace religion. And I'm not putting sociology on par with religion. I'm nowhere close to being a priest or a rabbi or anything else. That's not my goal in life. I have no interest in it. Having said that, let me give you an example. So Karl Marx, who we talked about in our chapter on stratification, and we also talked about him in the first chapter, right? So we talked about conflict theory, exploitation, right? People on the top taking advantage of people on the bottom, bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So that's Karl Marx. Karl Marx talked about religion was essentially created by the rich so that they could retain what they had. And for you to remain rich and others to remain poor, you need ways to suppress the poor so that you can remain on top. So Marx referred to religion as the opiate of the people, opiate meaning a drug, right? And so his sense, and many early sociologists carried this sense of being. His sense was that the rich created religion as a way to keep the poor down, but to keep them from rebelling against that religion would give them hope. It would give them rules to follow, but it would also give them hope either in this lifetime or perhaps another lifetime, right? So you can see that early sociologists had a lot of thoughts on religion and a lot of thoughts on how the goal of sociology at this point, the goal of sociology was to educate people about how society really works. And the thinking was, particularly from people like Marx, the thinking was, if we can explain to people how society works, how people interact, what stratification is, what drives it, that once we have those things, people won't need religion anymore because they'll understand stratification, they'll understand the rules at play, they'll understand how unfair life is, particularly from a socioeconomic level, and that would spur changes, right? And so obviously Marx was putting us on his set of train tracks toward euphoria, right? Toward the sense of commune, toward the sense of communism, which he envisioned, not the way that we've seen it play out in, places like the former Soviet Union or North Korea, right? Not playing out in such a, pounding way from the people on top, but more of a heaven on earth, if you will, right? Just we're in a chapter on religion, so I think I can say that. So as he was saying these things, just want you to understand that he was viewing religion as a way to justify those in power. Okay. Okay. Secularization. We have a handful of terms I want you to understand for this particular chapter. Secularization is one of them. In your notes, by secularization, simply write worldly. Right? So whatever Bible you and or your family reads, there are two sort of polar opposite ways of reading, and obviously there's many ways in between. But let's focus on the two basic ways of reading your Bible, assuming that you have one. So one way is to take it in an orthodox or a fundamental way, and that is in a literal way. So whatever it says happens, right? So in what many people refer to as the Old Testament, as it were, has a statement that says that the sun stood still in the sky for a day. I'm not trying to convince anyone on any religion. Hope you understand that. But there is a scripture that says the sun stood still in the sky for a day. A literal interpretation of that means that the sun actually, right, the earth stopped rotating, because at that point we didn't realize that the earth actually rotated around the sun. We thought the sun rotated around us. I mean, that's what it looks like, right? We can see it in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. But if we take that in a literal fashion, then time stopped. Right? Time literally stopped. And I mean, just think about how fast this planet is spinning right now, right? For this to be able to happen. If the Earth stopped spinning, I think we all understand everything on this planet would just be instantaneously vaporized. That's how fast we're going. So, just think about when you're doing 45 on Gulf Road, right? You're doing 45 on Gulf Road, and somebody pulls in front of you, and you slam on the brakes, and you come forward. That's 45 miles an hour. Just imagine going several thousand miles an hour and coming to a complete stop, right? So a literal interpretation, someone who takes that literal interpretation would say, forget all that. If it says the sun stood still in the sky for the day, the sun stood still in the sky for a day, period, right? God knows what he's doing, he or she, right? God, the supernatural being, knows what he or she is doing, assuming you can assign a sex to a supernatural being. But everything would be fine. So here's another take on that. So a secular or a worldly take would be, look, that didn't happen. The sun didn't really stand still in the sky for a day. What's the point of that message, right? What is the writer of this passage trying to get across to the reader? That's what a secular person would think, right? So those are two pretty different, very different kinds of interpretations of the same words, right? So one is saying, hey, whatever it says, that's what happened. The other person is saying, well, I don't think that really happened, but what's the point behind the story? I can still pull something from this. So I want you to understand the difference between literal and secular. And again, secular meaning worldly. Okay. Before we get to the key part of the conversation today, I want you to understand what religious economy is. And so what religious economy is putting butts in the seats, as it were, right? I mean, that's, I don't know if religious leaders would really refer to it in such a crass way, but that's really what we're talking about. Even during this coronavirus, many religious groups, my parents actually contacted me about what's a webcam, right? And how can I hook this up and where can I get one? And right. And so people are continuing to attend remotely religious services, right? And similar in some ways to what we're using in terms of how we're using lecture and YouTube right now, right? Probably not the best way to have this conversation. There's no interplay between us. Having said that, this is really what we need to do. So for many people in this country, today is April 8th. For many people in this country, this is Holy Week, right? So for people who are Protestant and Catholic, this is Holy Week. So Easter for them is this coming weekend. So religious economy, particularly for these groups this week and for all groups all the time, is how many people are attending, right? And so there's, whether we view it this way or not, this is the reality. There's competition for people to attend religious services. That's the religious economy. I'm going to give you a hint now that's going to play itself out in just a few minutes. The more worldly the service, the more secular the service, typically, not always, but typically, the more people who attend, right? So there's a word I want you to understand. So tension. The tension between a religious service and interacting with people in regular life outside of that service. Let's use the word tension. So people who, regardless of the religion, who are fundamental or orthodox and take a literal interpretation of their Bible. There is a high degree of tension between what they believe and what the rest of society believes, right? So in a secular service or a worldly service, there is a much smaller degree of tension between what people inside of the service believe and what people outside of the service believe. So if you want more people to attend, look, Bill Hybels, who I think retired a year or two ago from Willow Creek, right, which is just down the street from Harper. I know it well simply because I've been stopped in the evening while 5,000 people have been exiting that service, and it's taken me an extra 20 minutes to get home, right? That's my understanding of Willow Creek. But I'll say this. For a corporate training one time, Bill Hybels spoke, and Bill Hybels, if you don't know, founded Willow Creek, right? Many years ago. As I say, he just retired. Well, anyway, he didn't retire for good reasons, but anyway. But Bill Hybels recently retired. He's a fantastic speaker. He's just fantastic. He has charisma. He has a wonderful way of getting his point across. You want to believe what he's saying, right? Which is one of the key parts of charisma. He's a fantastic speaker. So he created this tiny church community that had very little going on, and he just made it this worldwide. He is consulted across the globe about how to put butts in seats, and he's excellent with it, right? One of the things you have to do There's a handful of things you have to do if you want a lot of people to attend. One, music has to be outstanding. We all love music, right? I see students when you're waiting on class to start. I see the earbuds in, and right, and for some of you, I can actually hear the music, even though I'm 10 feet away and your earbuds are in. So we love music as a people, and if you have great music, you're going to attract an awful lot of people. A friend that I went to college with is a professional singer. She has been extremely successful. You've heard one of her songs on the radio. She applied to be a singer at Willow Creek, just down the street from us, and she was rejected. And she was distraught, right? I mean, one of her big goals in life was to get up on that stage and sing. And again, this is a successful professional singer, and she was denied. So I only say that so that you understand stakes are pretty high. You have to be pretty good. You have to be pretty talented to get on that stage and sing at Willow Creek. So that's how good their music is. You also have to keep things to an hour, right? Make sure that there are opportunity for business contacts for people, and so they provide all kinds of things for people who attend so that they can better interact with each other. These are all worldly things, right? These are all secular things. I'm not trying to take away from any message that Bill Hybels or anyone else is trying to provide the world. I'm just simply saying that if from the outside looking in, and we're sociologists now, right? So we're sitting on the outside and we're looking in and we're trying to figure out how things work. The more secular the service, the more people who are going to attend. Okay. So there are three terms that I want you to be able to differentiate between: church, sect, and cult, right? So church, and by the way, I know when most people say church, they mean a Protestant or Catholic service. Forget that. Again, I do this every week. I do this every chapter. We use terms in sociology differently than they're used outside of class, right? So the nomenclature is to say, well, church is Protestant and Catholic. For this conversation, forget that. Church for us is a more secular service within any religion, right? Within absolutely any religion. So what I want to do, and I'm going to tell you a brief anecdote so that we can understand the difference between a church and a sect. So first of all, I know in your overheads there are a couple definitions here, but let me give you my definition for a sect, and then it'll play itself out in our anecdote. A sect, S-E-C-T, a sect grows out of and away from a church. Out of and away from a church. So think of it this way. Think of our classroom, right? Think of the classroom where we meet in J Building. Cut that room in half in terms of students. And if half of those students have been coming, pun intended, religiously for some period of time, and we have been talking about sociology religiously, right? You have to work with me here. And someone comes up to me and says, Jim, look, if you want more people to attend, you have to shorten the lecture a little bit. You need to play a video every once in a while, right? So they give me these kinds of this advice. So we do that, right? So we make it a little more secular, as it were. Now we have the whole class attending, right? We have all these people. This plays out all the time, right? So you'll see that in just a moment. So I'm driving a new car. I'm living in a new house. We're probably meeting in a new building, right? So we have all these people that are attending, and financially it is fantastic. I can guarantee you, whatever religious service you attend, this conversation is happening behind the scenes. And the conversation is, how far are we willing to go in a secular way? How far are we willing to go to attract new members without truly getting away from the word of the God that we worship, right? So What's eventually going to happen is some people are going to approach me and they're going to say, look, hey, this has been great. We love the new building. We love the new computer tech stuff that we have. This is fantastic. But our fear is that we're diluting the Word of God to attract more members, and maybe we need to get back to basics. I may say something like, I hear you, right? I hear you, but we have an awful lot of people attending. So this is the key part. At some point, a handful of people may break away. When they do that, they are a sect. They'll start meeting in someone's front room or living room. I guess it's contingent on where you grew up, whether you say front room or living room, right? So, but they'll start meeting in someone else's house. They're not meeting in a religious building. You actually don't need one. So, but they're revivalistic. They're getting back to basics. They don't want to dilute the word of their God. They want something more literal. I'm not saying they're becoming orthodox, but they want something more literal, more orthodox, more fundamental. When they break away and do that, they are a sect. So when I say that a sect breaks out of and away from a church, this is exactly what I mean. This happens all the time. Pick up a Daily Herald this weekend or view it online. You have to pay now. Sorry about that. And take a look at how many religious services are happening in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And in particular, take a look at how many of those services are happening in elementary school, middle school, and high school gymnasiums, right? And why are they happening there? Because of cost, right? It's cheaper to have your service there. Not all of these groups, but many of these groups are a sect. They've broken away from something and they're trying to get back to basics, be revivalistic, and start their own group. And so they meet in a high school gymnasium for some period of time until the group either falls apart or they attract enough members and they have enough resources financially where they can afford their own building, right? So this plays out all the time, right? Absolutely all the time. So if you want to know why their denomination is on your screen, if you want to know why there are so many denominations of all religions, this is why, right? And we all seek things that are different, right? We all want different things in life. And so, it may be within the same religion, but one service may be attractive to you. Another service may not be attractive to you, right? Many of our larger religious organizations have multiple services on Saturdays and Sundays. Some are geared toward younger people, some are geared toward older people, right? The music that they play is different in the two services. The message is for the most part the same. Maybe they tweak a couple things just to really get the point across, knowing that the audience is a little different. So we see, again, we're talking about religious economy. Remember that from a few weeks ago? And so you want to provide, as a religion, you want to provide things that are going to entice people to come in and to hear the word and to hear the message that you want to get across. So we've covered church, sect, and how denominations are formed. The final thing, and this is another one where I want you to know that we use the word differently in class than is used outside of class, but that's cult. So cult in sociology is a new religion. And please don't be offended by this, but I want you to understand, every religion, there was a day that it did not exist, and then there was a day that it did exist. And with each religion, when it started, there was conflict, right? People in society love mocking new religions, right? I mean, this has been around for the longest. If there's any information on the beginning of your religion, just take a look at some of those stories, right? They're pretty abrasive. They're pretty aggressive. And we see this play out all the time. So I'm not diminishing anyone's religion. I hope everyone understands that. I'm just simply saying that we use the word cult for new religion. Now, here's the thing I want you to get. So how do you take something that's new? And again, we're using the word cult. We'll use the word cult the way that it's used in regular society in a few minutes. How do you get from that new group to an established religion? Well, it's not easy, but it's fairly simple. the number of people who attend. There's no magic number, but there seems to be common sense. There seems to be common sense about this. So, for example, Mormons. Mormons were here in Illinois for a while, and Mormons left Illinois because of discrimination, right? So when I was a grad student, there was an afternoon, and I lived in an apartment complex near campus. My roommate and I were, I'm sure we were studying at this point. I'm sure I wasn't watching music videos and wasting time. So several cars pull into the parking lot, and several young men, 20-ish, in black suits get out of these cars. And so my roommate and I talked for a moment, and we saw them, and I said, well, I wonder who they are. I wonder what they want. And my roommate said, oh no. And he just went back to his room and closed the door. So I sat and waited because I knew at some point there would be a knock on the door. And sure enough, there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and two very young men in black suits asked me if I was familiar with the Book of Mormon. And I said no, but come on in, right? So we had a pretty interesting conversation. Here's how they started it. And by the way, if you're Mormon, I am not knocking your religion. I'm just using this as not a lot of people in the Northwest suburbs are that familiar with Mormonism. So they asked me if I knew who Jesus was, and I said, I think so. And what they said was, and again, whether you believe or don't believe, it's not germane to this conversation. So they said, if you think that when he died on the cross, that was the end of the story, you are mistaken, right? They said that's only half the story. So they said he was instantaneously reincarnated in Central America, and the Book of Mormon is about his experiences there. And if you don't read the Book of Mormon, you only have half the story, right? And I said, that's interesting, right? So we had a pretty interesting conversation. One of the two gentlemen just watched videos the whole time he was there. I think he felt a little forced to be a missionary, as it were. The other guy was kind of the Bible expert. And so I asked him a couple questions he wasn't able to answer, and I felt a little puffy-chested about that. I shouldn't have. It was going to be short-lived. But they said, hey, they left the Book of Mormon that I never opened. And they said, we'll come back a week from now and we can talk more. So the guy I guess I bonded with, who watched the videos, came back, and he brought a new Bible expert with him. There was no stumping this guy, so it actually wasn't as much fun. And I never went to anything that they invited me to, and I think they gave up on my soul, and they just went away. So, but it was really interesting interacting with them and having conversations about a new religion. In the 90s, you may not know this, but the Chicago Bulls used to have a really good basketball team, right? Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan's the reason they had a very good basketball team. But Dennis Rodman played for the Bulls for 3 championships, and Dennis Rodman was kind of a rebel, and had all kinds of ink and piercings, and just lived a crazy life. And he didn't really know what Mormons were, and so he thought it was a race. And so a reporter asked him a question about Mormons in Utah, and he gave a strange answer. And the coach of the Bulls at that time recognized right away what was happening, and he stepped in and put his arm around Mr. Rodman and said, hey, he's just this is a great guy. He's just not really understanding your question. So. So here's my point with that. So Mormons were in Illinois for a while. They went to Mexico, and then Brigham Young, and again, I'm not advocating Mormonism. I just always feel obligated to say this. Brigham Young took them west. They were looking for their promised land, as it were, and they went to Utah. If anyone in here is into skiing or mountain biking, or just beautiful forest. Utah is just absolutely gorgeous. And so Brigham Young led them to Utah. You can't go much further. There's an ocean. And so Mormons settled in Utah. And so it's the dominant religion per capita, if you will, in Utah. So So it wasn't a big deal in the 90s here in Chicago. There's definitely many more Mormons who live here now, but in the 90s there were not very many. And so if you were to ask people in 1995, are Mormons a cult, right? Meaning, are they a new, not established religion? I think many people would have said, yeah, right? And that may or may not have been true, but I think that was the feeling of many people. Today, Mormonism is an established religion. Why is it an established religion? Because there's a lot of people who practice Mormonism, right? So that's how cults work. So you stop being a cult when there is enough of you and you become an established religion. But all religions have a beginning. So, but let's talk for a moment about cults, the way that you think about cults outside of the classroom. So Jamestown, right? So for Jamestown, you had a spiritual leader in California who was very successful, by the way. If you were a politician in California back during his particular time period, you wanted your picture taken with him because he had an awful lot of influence. So he ran a really tight-knit group. Once you joined his group, you had to hand over all of your resources, and there weren't many rich people who joined. It was primarily poorer people. But having said that, you still, whatever you have, you have. So people had to hand over their worldly possessions. And so he was running into some issues in California. And he decided, well, let's just move to more of a jungle setting to really get away. So they moved to Ghana. And there, he was really invested in drugs, and he lived most of his life high, right? And I don't mean on pot. He was into LSD, and I mean he was into serious drug use. And if you were a member of his church community, and say you wanted to marry someone within that community, the two of you would meet with Jim Jones, and Jim Jones would give you the yes or no in terms of whether you could get married or not. It was quite likely that he would have sex with each of you, and then he would say to the two of you, I give you my blessing to get married, but going forward, the wife can only have sex with me, right? I mean, that was the power that he swayed over this group of people. Well, an awful lot of people fled because there was abuse, as you might imagine, with a leader who was a drug addict. And so there got to be a lot of information back to California that, something crazy is going on. We need to address it. So Congress people from California flew to Jim Jones's compound in the jungle, and they met with him. And he knew at this point the gig was up, right? So he had been talking for the longest time about the end of the world. And they had codes and messages that they used to tell everyone when it was time to commit suicide so that they would miss the end of the world. You've heard the phrase, someone is drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, this refers to Jonestown, right? And so as the story goes, people drank Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. Well, this isn't quite right. They didn't have enough cyanide to kill everyone. And so in a large vat, they put in everything that they thought might kill you. So cleaning products, bleach. They had a little cyanide, and they did try to mix some Kool-Aid in with it. No. So here's the deal. You were going to die this day. Over 900 people died on this particular day, right, from suicide. Just absolutely one of the worst days in history. And you had a choice, and they had an order. Children went first because poisoning is an agonizing way to die, right? It doesn't happen instantaneously, and it's very painful. So the children probably drank Kool-Aid, right? But for adults, and again, women went before the men, right? They're very, anyway, all kinds of jokes there. I'll just let them go. But you had a choice. You're going to die, and you have three choices. You can either drink the poison You can be injected with a syringe with the poison, or they're going to shoot you. If you chose not to take the poison either orally or through a syringe, they were going to gun you down. So you were going to die. Here's a really interesting part of this story, at least to me. It seems that Jim Jones rejected the poison, right? And because there was no poison found in his body and he had been shot. And so one of the interesting ways to view this is that the guards with the guns had to have realized when their leader did not partake of the poison, as he ordered everyone else to do, that they had to realize that it was a sham, right? That he chose not to do that, and they had to kill him. And then the interesting thing is, so on some level, you either realize that your leader is a sham, and then your guilt, you have a lot of guilt about 900 and some people dying on this day, and you're a part of it, or they continued to believe and they thought his human frailty kept him from committing suicide, but the guards turned the guns on themselves and killed themselves, right? So it's a horrible day. An awful lot of people died, and we have sayings from it, right? We always take the worst things that happen and someone writes a song or a poem about it. But for this one, we still say drinking the Kool-Aid. And let's face it, when people think of cults, this is the kind of thing that they think about. So I want you to understand the story, but I also want you to know that for the most part in sociology, when we talk about cult, we're talking about a brand new religion. That's it for chapter 15. That is the highlights of the highlights. I hope you have a tremendous day, and I will hopefully see you soon.